For decades, Europe has leaned heavily on the United States for its security, with NATO serving as the backbone of this arrangement. But Donald Trump, during his first term as president, called this relationship into question like no leader before him. His sharp criticism of NATO allies for failing to meet their defense spending commitments wasn't just talk. It came with real threats to pull back U.S. support. Now, with the possibility of Trump returning to the White House, the stakes are higher than ever. If the U.S. scales down its role, will Europe be able to fill the gap? And, more importantly, can it afford the economic burden that comes with it? Here's where the cracks begin to show. Europe's economies are already under immense pressure, facing persistent inflation, slowing growth, and rising costs of living. Balancing increased military spending while keeping popular social programs intact will be a daunting task. Some nations, like Germany and Italy, already lag far behind NATO's 2% GDP defense target, and catching up would require billions in additional spending. To make matters worse, Trump's proposed tariffs on European exports could hit industries like manufacturing and automotive hard, further straining already fragile economies. In this video, we'll break down the economic risks facing Europe if Trump follows through on his threats, from skyrocketing defense budgets to trade conflicts that could ripple across the continent. The question isn't just about military preparedness, it's about Europe's ability to sustain its economic future under growing pressure. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Europe's defense spending and economic trade-offs. Let's go back to 2014. Russia had just annexed Crimea, shaking Europe to its core and reminding NATO why its existence mattered. At the NATO summit that year, every member country made a promise. They would increase their defense spending to at least 2% of their GDP by 2024. It wasn't just a political commitment. It was a practical necessity to ensure European security. But fast forward a decade, and the results are far from what was pledged. While a handful of countries have met the target, the majority, including economic powerhouses like Germany and Italy, still lag behind. Why is this happening? The simple answer: money. Defense spending isn't cheap, and governments have had to make tough economic choices. For years, Europe has benefited from the peace dividend, the idea that post-Cold War stability allowed countries to redirect funds from military budgets to social programs like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. These investments improved quality of life and boosted economic growth. However, this trade-off left European defense systems underfunded, outdated, and in some cases, barely operational. Now, with security concerns rising and Donald Trump questioning U.S. commitments, Europe faces the economic consequences of that decision. Take Germany, for example. As Europe's largest economy, it's under immense pressure to meet NATO's target. But Germany currently spends just 1.4% of its GDP on defense, far below the 2% goal. Reaching that benchmark would mean spending tens of billions of euros more each year. For a government already struggling with inflation, public sector demands, and rising energy costs, that's no small ask. Italy faces an even greater challenge, balancing its economic woes with military obligations while trying to avoid deeper public backlash. And these are just two examples. Across Europe, countries must decide whether to cut popular social programs or risk falling short on their NATO commitments. The consequences of this decision go beyond politics. Increasing military spending would mean less funding for social services that millions of Europeans depend on, potentially sparking protests and social unrest. On the other hand, failing to act could leave Europe vulnerable and economically unprepared for the ripple effects of a U.S. pullback. Defense spending, unlike social investment, doesn't produce immediate economic returns, which makes it a hard sell for leaders already facing strained budgets and restless electorates. So, where does this leave Europe? The choice is clear, but not easy. Some countries are ramping up spending despite the trade-offs, while others remain hesitant to sacrifice their economic stability. But here's the real question. If Europe couldn't hit its defense targets when times were good, how will it cope now, when economic challenges are mounting and the stakes have never been higher? Potential economic fallout of U.S. trade policies. In 2018, the world watched as Donald Trump launched a wave of tariffs, targeting everything from Chinese steel to European cars. For many in Europe, it was a wake-up call. Suddenly, industries that relied on exporting goods to the United States, a key trading partner, found themselves grappling with higher costs and disrupted supply chains. Now, as Trump signals his intention to impose even stricter trade policies if he wins a second term, Europe faces a familiar yet even more daunting challenge: how to shield its economy from a potential trade war with the world's largest economy. Let's start with the auto industry, often described as the backbone of Europe's manufacturing sector. Germany, the continent's economic powerhouse, exports billions of dollars worth of cars to the U.S. annually. Brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen are household names, but their success is tied to America's vast consumer market. Trump has already threatened to slap a 25% tariff on imported vehicles, a move that could cripple German automakers and reverberate across the entire European supply chain. From steel producers in Poland to electronic component manufacturers in Italy, the fallout would be felt far and wide. But it's not just cars. Trump has also hinted at targeting agricultural exports, a sector that provides critical revenue for countries like France, Spain, and the Netherlands. European farmers, already struggling with rising costs and climate-related challenges, would face additional pressure as U.S. tariffs make their products less competitive in American markets. Imagine the ripple effects. Reduced exports mean lower income for farmers, which in turn affects local economies that depend on agricultural jobs and spending. Trade tensions wouldn't just hurt specific industries, they could also weaken Europe's broader economic recovery. With many countries already battling inflation and stagnating growth, a trade war could push fragile economies closer to recession. And let's not forget the financial markets. During Trump's first term, European stock indices often reacted sharply to trade policy announcements, with investors pulling back at the first sign of uncertainty. If Trump ramps up tariffs again, expect similar volatility, making it harder for businesses to plan and invest. Strategic autonomy and economic implications. In 2019, French President Emmanuel Macron declared that Europe needed to pursue strategic autonomy, a vision where the continent would rely less on external powers like the United States for security, technology, and critical supplies. At the time, the idea was met with mixed reactions. For some, it seemed like a lofty goal. For others, a necessity born out of geopolitical realities. Today, with the potential return of Donald Trump and rising uncertainty about U.S. commitments to NATO and trade, the concept of strategic autonomy has taken on new urgency. And it's no longer just about politics. It's about the survival of Europe's economy. One of the most pressing areas for autonomy is defense. Over the past decade, Europe has depended heavily on the U.S. for advanced military technologies, from surveillance systems to missile defense. However, building an independent defense infrastructure comes at a steep cost. Countries would need to ramp up investments in research and development, establish joint production initiatives, and create economies of scale to make projects viable. For instance, the European Union's push to develop its own fighter jet, a collaboration between France, Germany, and Spain, has already faced delays and ballooning budgets. While these efforts could stimulate local industries and create jobs, they also risk draining resources from other critical areas, like healthcare and education. Beyond defense, strategic autonomy extends to energy and technology. Europe's over-reliance on Russian energy imports became painfully clear during the Ukraine war, prompting a swift pivot toward renewable energy and LNG imports. But transitioning to energy independence isn't cheap. Nations like Germany are pouring billions into renewable infrastructure and energy storage technologies, hoping to reduce future vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Europe is also trying to break free from dependence on U.S. tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft by investing in homegrown platforms. While promising, these initiatives require significant upfront capital and carry the risk of failure in competitive global markets. Then there's the question of trade. Europe's strategic autonomy doesn't mean isolation, but it does mean diversifying partnerships. The EU has been negotiating trade agreements with nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America to reduce dependence on the US and China. While these deals could open new markets and strengthen Europe's global standing, they also require delicate diplomacy and time, two things Europe may not have in abundance. A call for economic preparedness. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe relied on the United States to rebuild its shattered economies and provide security under the NATO umbrella. That relationship, forged out of necessity, became the foundation of modern Europe's prosperity. But today, the dynamics are shifting, and Europe stands at a crossroads. With the potential return of Donald Trump, whose policies could disrupt everything from defense to trade, the continent faces an economic reckoning. How it chooses to navigate this moment will shape its future for generations. Europe's challenges are daunting. Defense spending must increase, but at what cost? Social programs, the cornerstone of European welfare states, could face cuts as governments scramble to meet NATO commitments. Trade policies could shift dramatically, threatening key industries like automotive manufacturing and agriculture. And the pursuit of strategic autonomy, while essential, demands significant financial investment at a time when many countries are already grappling with inflation and slow growth. The question isn't just whether Europe can afford these changes, but whether it can act quickly enough. The economic clock is ticking, and hesitation could leave Europe vulnerable, not just militarily, but financially. Leaders will need to make tough, unpopular decisions to secure their economies and safeguard their futures. But one thing is clear: standing still is not an option. The road ahead won't be easy, but it is crucial. Europe must rise to meet these challenges with bold action and a clear vision. If not now, then when? Thank you for being part of Economy Explorer. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to check out one of the suggested videos on your screen. We're here to keep you informed, and we appreciate your support every step of the way.